this was brought home to me. This is sort of my new favorite story to share. But when I was in a conversation with the CEO of a university hospital in Europe, and so this woman had this idea that, nurses, who are typically in a very hierarchical system, with, the head nurse and then, the head nurse, and, should work in self-managing teams. And so I had a few conversations with her. And so she used a slogan to talk about what she wanted to do. And she didn't use teal. She said, like, she wanted to become a liberated hospital. And that drew a lot of resistance. And people said, like, that's ridiculous. You can't liberate a hospital. This is life and death. And you can't just simply, let people free to do whatever they want. And, and so just that slogan attracted a lot of resistance. And so I asked her, this question about what is it that makes you want to do this? All the other hospital CEOs are very happy to sit on the top of the pyramid and do their thing. And, you feel compelled to do something that sounds crazy to most people. And it wasn't easy for her to answer that question. Like most of the time, we're so cerebral, we answer with, answers of the mind. And I kept pushing until she gave me that story that gave me goosebumps when she told me. And she said, I don't remember, it was like a year or two earlier. She said, I walked through the hospitals at 3:45. I had an outside meeting and I saw all these nurses waiting in the corridors, waiting to clock out. And there was some sense of sort of disgust at maybe not herself, but at her organization and what the organization had done to these nurses, who are all people who tend to choose these jobs out of a sense of vocation, not to make a career, not to make much money, and who've been turned into these sort of, lifeless persons just waiting 15 minutes before 4 o'clock to clock out. And she was just so disgusted by that. And so these moments I find are just these really powerful sort of leverage points. And, you can thicken then the story with way more stories about, all the things that predisposed her in her childhood or in her growing up to actually see that moment in that way. Traditional CEO would have just said like, all these nurses, they're not motivated and, why don't they work harder? But she was just disgusted by that. And of course, once she started sharing this story, she drew so much more energy. Like there's no way to resist that story, right? No one in their right mind would say, I think it's a good thing that these nurses wait at 3:45, right? So it was just so much more powerful than any abstraction of, I want to become a teal organization or a liberated company. And so the more time passes, the more I believe in these very simple stories, these very simple moments of hurt, these moments where we just feel like this is not something we can caution any longer.
This emphasis on lived personal experience of what is offensive to the soul and what is inspiring and empowering and authorizing to the soul, and letting choices be grounded in day-to-day experience feels so important. Recognizing that ideals that we would align with and our friends would align with, even those ideals regularly turn into their opposite when they are pursued in an abstract and what goes with that ideological way. So
one of the things that I think is so powerful when you frame it at that level is that it's okay not to know. It's okay not to have an answer, right? We so much expect our leaders to have answers for everything and to have plans. And so, okay, so if we go teal, so what's the plan? And I think when you tell stories from that way, it's totally okay not to have an answer, right? It's totally okay for that leader of the hospital to say, I don't know how we will fix or how we'll change this and how we will, allow the nurses to be nurses again. I don't know, but I simply know that I cannot no longer caution this way of doing things. Or as you're saying, the opposite, when you have like little elements that you see are just fantastic, little stories in the hospitals of, there's the the maternity ward where they no longer had a chief nurse for some reason, and they never replaced her. And suddenly all the most extraordinary things happened, and she could tell beautiful stories about that. There's also an element of, how did this happen? I don't know. Mm-hmm. But this is where we want to go. And so we, it helps us avoid this trap of the abstraction where we know better and where we turn sort of ideals into nightmares.